Good evening. Be thankful Parliament is closed down for the week. We've had a week free of scandals, and tonight I'm going to astonish you by being positive. Positive about sport, positive about jobs, and positive about refugees. First, here's Ted with the rundown.
Can 450 jobs at Western Canada Steel be saved? Is it true BC can't compete with cheaper steel from Mexico? Tonight, Webster dons a hard hat to tour Western Canada Steel. Canada has cut the flow of incoming refugees from a flood to a trickle. Refugees are now lining up at our borders, waiting to get in following the clampdown on immigration policies last week. Tonight, Webster hears what's happening at BC's border. But first, is Canada training hockey players or hooligans? Last month's brouhaha with the Soviets has caused serious damage to our Canadian amateur hockey program. In the studio with Webster, Federal Minister of State for Fitness and Amateur Sport, Otto Jelinek.
Mr. Jelinek is a famous athlete in his own right. He is a Hall of Famer. He looks reasonably fit. He should do. He's got $50 million of our taxpayers' money for fitness and amateur sport. I thought that a Conservative government would have left that entirely to free enterprise. What? It's people's own fault that they smoke and they're fat and flabby, isn't it?
Good point, Mr. Webster. You're really on today because, as a matter of fact, that's exactly what we're trying to do in my ministry, as we are in the other ministries, and that is to reduce the burden on the taxpayer. And in our case, in fitness and amateur sport, I developed a sport marketing council whereby we go out to the private sector and try to get money for the development of amateur sport and fitness programs in Canada.
Sport marketing council is to get money from private business. How can you spend $50 million on fitness and amateur sport of the taxpayers' money in these hard-pressed times? What do you do with it? I mean, where does it all go?
It goes across the country to all the sports governing bodies. It goes for the holding of such events as the Canada Games, which brings athletes together from every part of the corner. They're currently taking place in Cape Breton. I think from a nationalistic standpoint and a pride standpoint, I'll tell you there's no money better spent. But under a Conservative government, just like everywhere else, we're reducing those figures and replacing them with private sector involvement, and I think it's working tremendously well because we're getting more and more corporations on board to support the development of amateur sport.
Fair enough. I'm not going to say what I was going to say. But
go ahead and say it.
No, I won't say it.
Go ahead and say it.
We're having a week of positive peace.
No, go ahead and say it, Mr.
You have
Webster.
no scandals in your ministry?
No, sir.
Not a single solitary one?
There are no scandals all week this week because the opposition is out of town.
No, because the House of Commons is closed down. We're waiting for next week's installments, day by day by day. Now, what about the sordid mismanagement of the 1988 Winter Olympic ticket sales?
The 1980...
Was that under your supervision?
The federal government is a major partner in that. The ticket sales fall directly under the organizing committee, but I'm not putting them to blame. The blame rests with all of us involved with the Olympics. And the problem that developed is that it wasn't explained to the public ahead of time that 6,000 media people come from all over the world to cover the Olympic Games, and that certain amount of tickets, in order for a country or a city to get the Games, must be put aside for primarily the media, some officials from the international sports governing bodies, and the IOC itself. If we would have told the public, or if the organizing committee would have told the public prior to selling the tickets, that problem wouldn't have been there. That problem is now resolved, and I'll tell you we're heading into what will be the best Winter Olympic Games in the history of the Olympic movement.
Sure enough, but there seemed to be a terribly small proportion that went out of the country. I think about 90% were in Alberta of the tickets, weren't they?
Well, right now, the rest of Canadians aren't buying the tickets. And in fact, we're advertising in the rest of Canada, offering tickets for sales in other parts of the country. The Albertans first bought the tickets, and now we're hoping that people from British Columbia are going to go to Calgary, and from Toronto, and from all over the country.
I'm told that because of this appalling behavior of the Canadians in the World Junior Hockey Championship, where we were leading and got robbed of our gold medal because of bad discipline and brutality, that we're now going to lose a lot of these good players for the Olympics in due course, right?
That's what the International Ice Hockey Federation is saying. I totally disagree with them. I've objected already, and in fact, I, who am such an anti-communist, have gotten together with my Soviet counterpart and we will be appealing this to the International Ice Hockey Federation because those kids don't deserve that type of a penalty. It wasn't their fault. There was a lack of discipline. I agree.
Bad behavior takes two to start a fight.
There was a lack of discipline. The Soviets initiated it. We should have had a little bit more discipline. However, the main fault was with the officials who lost control totally of the game, and there's no use just slapping the wrist of a bunch of young kids by the International Federation. What they should do is come up with some clinics to improve international officiating so that this thing won't happen again, and that's what I'm offering the international ice hockey community.
You and the Russians are going to go together in a joint appeal, are you?
Yes, we are.
Because they want to get their players too for the Olympics,
well,
the juniors.
They don't need the juniors, unfortunately, but we're going to them, and as two superpowers in ice hockey, I think the International Ice Hockey Federation has got to listen.
But it's a 3-year suspension.
It's a 1.5-year suspension with a further 1.5-year probation, and unfortunately the Olympics comes in less than 1 year. And I'll tell you this, I'll make a bet on you on air here that we're going to get that reversed by the International Ice Hockey Federation. And
that's only because the Russians are good enough to go with you, and because to take out the Russians and the Canadians would make the Olympics a little less attractive.
Well, I don't think that's it, because the Russians don't need their junior players on their national team, and we do. We also hope we'll get some NHLers on the national team, maybe not from the Canucks. I don't think we need any
Why
of them
not?
from there.
It's the finest team in the National Hockey League.
Well, it's a great team, but it's not doing too well. It beat Toronto last night, though, 3-2.
That was purely accidental, let me assure you. Now, not a great sports buff myself, although I'm clinically, physically perfect in every way.
You look great, Mr. Webster, just terrific.
For my age, I'm doing not bad. What about all this doping? I mean, we had a bit of a scandal in weightlifters, didn't we? And anabolic steroids and whatnot.
We had a scandal because I put on a policy last year that any athletes caught using anabolic steroids is going to be cut off automatically from any further federal government support, which eliminates them virtually from further competition. And there were some athletes that were caught. They thought I was bluffing. I wasn't. We kicked them out, and they are no longer eligible to participate and to get funding. And I think that's a right step in the right direction, because drugs in amateur sport where the youth is involved don't mix at all.
What about testing? Are there any particularly bad areas, or is it only in anabolic steroids for the weightlifters?
No,
all of whom look as if they use them.
No, it's not just weightlifters. Unfortunately, it's gone beyond that into track and field and other sports. And we've put the policy right across the board, initiated random testing, and have 2 of the greatest facilities in the world in Canada which test beyond a shadow of a doubt whether the athletes have used such drugs as anabolic steroids and related drugs. And if they're caught in any of these random tests using these drugs, then they get cut off from any further financing or funding.
Financing or funding, and that's your one weapon. You can't ban them from participating, can you?
They can't participate because we control the events as well. So they're virtually out of luck. And I think that's good, because sport is youth. Youth and fitness. And as a matter of fact, Mr. Webster, we're bringing in the Tribute to Champions here, where we, Government of Canada, on behalf of all Canadians, pays tribute and thanks our national young athletes for working and busting their behinds on behalf of Canada all over the world. And we're bringing it to Vancouver on April the 8th. And on the air, I would like to ask you to be one of our presenters. It'll be nationally televised. We can make a big TV star out of you.
How can a little fat man like me get up on a platform to give an award for sport? I mean, that's ridiculous.
You're not little.
I look like
you're not little, and you're not too fat. And the young athletes, the young athletes who have been doing so well for Canada.
Who is it I look like again? Remember the cartoon? The root bear. I walk like the root bear. April 8th.
April the 8th in Vancouver.
You're going to give me an award?
No, you're going to be giving someone else an award. And we're asking you to do that, and I'm putting it on the air to you, the question. Very much, because you know, these young...
Because I said no off the air, you know that, a couple of weeks ago.
I didn't know that.
How could I appear in public with a Conservative politician? Who knows what scandals your government will be involved in by April 8th?
Oh, come on, you're being silly now.
I'll come.
He's coming. You heard it first here on the Jack Webster Show. Mr.
Well,
Webster,
is it on CTV?
Yes, it is.
Because I can't appear on that other network.
No, we wouldn't even think of having the other network cover it, right?
Okay, Otto Jelinek, tell me, when did you last have skates on?
15 years ago or so. I don't skate
You and
anymore.
your sister were the pairs champion of what?
Of the world.
The world!
That's right. And the only...
There you are up there, you and your sister.
Oh, I see.
See
You
that?
see, that's when I was young and skinny, and the only reason that we were able to make it is because my sister used to hold me up all the time, and when she quit skating, there was curtains for me, and I had to go into other things such as politics.
Questions for Otto Jelinek, himself a natural born con man. I hate these functions. After the break. Go, baby, go! Otto Jelinek, Minister of Fitness now. That's the easiest touch in the cabinet.
It gets pretty tough, but I feel good at it because I feel at home in this portfolio.
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Jelinek,
Yep.
anabolic steroids.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Yes. The Russians use them freely. Now they have devices they can get around the test even. How in the world can the Canadian athletes or any other athletes go up against them in this kind of a thing?
Good one. Mr. Webster should have asked that question. As a matter of fact, I realized right at the outset that we had to get a uniform international policy, but there was no way I could approach my international counterparts until we cleaned up our case here at home. I did that, and now for the last year and a half, I started an international effort to clean it up. I've gotten Western European countries on board, as you would well imagine, got the People's Republic of China on board, I've got the United States on board. The Eastern Soviet countries are the hardest nut to crack. I've met with them now. We're moving in the right direction, and if they want to participate internationally with the IOC and other communities, they'll have to come on board. And I think that over a period of time, not too long, but a period of time, we'll be able to eradicate the use of drugs from sports internationally.
You're a great politician. You can talk for 3.5 minutes without even taking a breath.
I had to answer the gentleman in full, otherwise you would have been knocking me again.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Jelinek.
Yes.
I'd like to ask you, can you give the people one good reason why that hockey players that continuously fight during the game shouldn't be thrown out for the rest of the season?
Well, first of all, in the International Ice Hockey Federation, that is not part of the rule. Only the first 5 players, so the International Federation broke their own rule. Look, I'm against violence more than anybody else, or as much as anybody else. I started a Fair Play Commission against violence well before that fight last year with Wayne Gretzky as the honorary chairman. We've been progressing. As a matter of fact, the Tribute to Champions that you're coming to, Jack, is going to have for the first time a Fair Play Award. So it's not a question of just kicking out the players. It's a question of doing something to improve the game in the future.
Well, I think one of the things that could be done
Go on.
would be to make the penalties much stiffer than they've been in the past, because in a sport that everybody loves in this country, that children are constantly watching, you don't see a game where you don't see a bloody fight.
I agree with you, and I'm against violence, and I've been talking with the NHL on this, and I'm glad to see that even the NHL is moving in the right direction with some of the new changes in rules. But not enough.
In many ways. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Jelinek.
Yes, sir.
More about the anabolic steroids. The testing is done, I understand, prior to the event. Now, why is the testing not done, say, 3 to 6 months prior to the event? Because it is well known that these athletes are using steroids for that period of time prior to the event, and it can be caught in their system then. Why wait?
The new policy that we developed last year is exactly what you're suggesting we do. It used to be, as you say, now it is random testing throughout the course of the year so that no athlete is safe if they're using it, because you're right, they could very easily get off steroids prior to the event and then not be caught. So we hope that we've moved in the right direction in this area as well.
You sure caught some listeners with the anabolic bit. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Mr. Jelinek.
Yes.
I basically find it very hard for your government and also your predecessors there, the Liberals, supporting the Canadian Soccer Federation when they qualified for the World Cup and played in it. I think you people come up with $150,000, and the CBC got $280,000 to spend televising it. Or at the same time, Petro-Canada spends $14 million plus for some people to play in their sailboats in Australia, and this is our gas petroleum company. How do you justify all this?
Sailboats, they didn't, but I'll justify any time you want supporting our national soccer team that went to the World Cup.
But he's complaining not enough money, $150,000 it cost the
They had to get in your
CBC.
hands and knees. You give them $75,000, and then they had to get in hands and knees when they were in Mexico City for another $75,000.
No, you don't know the facts right. I was the first one to break the rule in the federal government that gave the national team funding when they are considered professionals. When the Liberals, even the Liberals, who spend money more freely than Mr. Webster would ever know about, said don't spend money on the professional team. I said, look, they are representing Canada. I'm going to make a deal with the private sector and match up to $150,000. In fact, it was up to $300,000, any monies that comes from the private sector. And we got $600,000 from the private sector. We raised another $300,000 for them, and therefore they were not on their hands and knees in Mexico. I was with them, and the team and the officials from that team were very thankful to our support for that team, and I think Canada benefited as a result of the great performance by the Canadians in Mexico.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, Mr. Jelinek.
Yes, sir.
How are we doing against our older Swedish friend that we used to be compared with all the time? How are we doing for fitness?
Yeah.
A hell of
older
a,
people, particularly.
a hell of a lot better than 20 years ago. I think that's a myth about being as fit as a 60-year-old Swedes. Canadians have come a long way, and we don't have to take a back seat to anybody anymore because Canadians are participating. There are all these opportunities open to them from the schooling system right up through fitness in the working place. That's one of the areas that governments in partnership with the private sector and with organizations right across the country have provided opportunities for Canadians. There are tests. Our recent tests at Fitness Canada show that the majority of Canadians now are as fit as any in the world, and not all Canadians, mind you. Not all Canadians, I'm saying majority. And we're still continuing to try to encourage the rest of Canada to get on board because you not only feel better, you work better, and you reduce health care costs
Sure.
if you're in better shape. And, you know, that's what it's all about.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Jelinek, I'd just like to say, to start off with, I'm very proud to have you as our Minister for Sport, and I think that you've done an incredible job. And I hope that in the future you will be able to continue. I have a couple questions, though. What seems to be the problem about scholarships for funding for part of the athletes in university? It is very sparse, and is there any way we can have this done on a national level?
It's a concern that I have that a lot of our Canadian young kids go south of the border for scholarships. We don't have athletic scholarships. I have initiated, not a study, but a group of people to find ways and means of initiating national scholarships in this country. I don't want to, by the way, I want to emphasize this before Jack cuts me off, I don't want to copy the U.S. system because there the educational aspects is on the back burner.
You get a
and
bunch of
scholarships
adults
only.
who can't read or write,
True.
who are financed their way through college and come out.
True. We're not going to repeat that, but we want to give our young kids who want to use the academic aspects as a priority, the opportunity also to participate in their fitness development and sport development. And we're going to have that in place, hopefully, as a legacy of the Calgary Olympics by next year. So we'll hope to have scholarships by then.
Yeah, we could do some with some golf scholarship money because the West Coast is the only place you can play all year round.
You don't need a scholarships, but
Not
Mr.
me, I'm talking about the young golfers.
You wanted a scholarship. You talked to me earlier about it, and we're not going to give you one, Mr. Webster.
Point of order, privilege.
Before we come to an end,
I've been maligned and slurred and libeled and defamed.
Before we come to an end and you kick me off here, I want to let you know that you've been such a good sport that we want to give you something on May 20...
I cannot take Piola from the Tory government.
On May 22nd, you used to take it from the Grits. Why shouldn't you take it
That's
from the Tories?
That's a lie.
On May 22nd is going to be
National
Fit Week, Sneaker Day. And last year, about 6 million Canadians participated. And we want you on May 22nd to wear sneakers. And I brought a pair of sneakers especially made for you with a Webster tartan on it. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a Webster tartan. And National Sneaker Day starts on May the 2nd. You're getting me so excited I'm being confused here. And Jack, I'm going to ask your staff to make sure that you wear them. And we're going to have a picture of you, and I'm going to wave it in Parliament so all your friends in the New Democratic Party can cheer you.
Tell me, when are they made?
I don't know where they're made.
They're free trade books made in the United States of America.
And that's not very...
Made in the USA.
Well, there you go. There you go.
That's good.
We couldn't
well,
find your
I will
carton
accept publicly this small form of patronage, Piola, if not anything worse than that, from Otto Jelinek. And I don't know what I can give you in return, except my best wishes your government survives till Christmas.
Our government is going to survive beyond 88. There's more jobs, interest rates are down, unemployment is down, productivity is up, and we know we're in some difficulties now, but as long as the
Thank
economy...
God we're living in southern Ontario.
As long as the economy continues to improve, as it has in the last 2.5 years, we'll be back, Jack, and nice talking to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Otto. See, I'm not ashamed to shake hands with the Tory Cabinet Minister, not accept his Piola. Where are they? Thanks, Otto.
Thank you.
Much obliged. I'll be back with a more serious topic after the break. Many Canadians were surprised, some pleasantly, some unhappily, when the federal government acted a couple of days ago to clamp down on the easy entrance of potential refugees into Canada. And I've asked two people to be here tonight to talk about the clinical aspects of this, not so much the political aspects of it. And one of them is Jim Pasman, who is the acting manager of enforcement for Immigration Department of CEIC in BC and the Yukon. And the other is Vera Radio, who is the executive director of Mosaic Immigration Services, a non-profit society that helps immigrants so they can contribute effectively to Canadian society. Now, what I want to get from you, Jim, is what is going to happen at our borders, say down at Douglas. I get the impression right off the top that people come to the border, get turned back, and may come back again for a hearing. Is this a draconian move which changes the previous system, or is it only a way of backing up the refugee claimants?
It's a way of bringing, I think, the movement under some sort of control, and instead of automatically allowing everyone in that comes to the port of entry, they're going to be required to wait in the United States until we can have the formal immigration hearing.
Now, part of this waiting in the United States is because of the US's new laws which say that employers who employ illegal immigrants are liable themselves to very punitive action.
That's certainly a push factor. That's why people are coming up to our ports of entry.
All right. If I'm a refugee, we'll say from Central America, and as of the new regulations, I present myself at one of your offices at Douglas, for instance, what actually happens to me?
Well, you'll be examined to see whether you have documents to enter Canada legally. If you don't, then you'll be told that you're being reported, that you cannot enter Canada at this time, and that a formal hearing will be held at a later date, and you'll be required to wait in the United States until that hearing takes place.
Now, do I have, first of all, to say, therefore, I've got no landed immigrant papers.
Right.
I have no visa that lets me into Canada. I may come from Central America. I'm in the States at the moment. Do I get a hearing sometime later in this country?
You get a hearing at the border sometime later. At the moment, it's a few days. It probably will be a matter of weeks once we get operating. We had a very quiet time since the new measures were introduced on the weekend.
They haven't started to move from Buffalo yet to the West Coast to come in here at the light of traffic.
Not that we're aware of. Maybe they're on their way.
All right. Under the old system, when I came, I just said, I'm a refugee. Okay. You let me in, no question about it, most of the time, and I got a permit to work.
If you were from a Central American country, in most cases you were given a minister's permit, you were allowed to stay in the country, you bypassed the normal refugee stream. In other words, you didn't have to prove that you were a refugee, all you had to be was coming from one of these designated countries. Yeah.
Now, though, I come in and your man says to me, you haven't got an immigrant landing card, back to the States till we call you back again.
That's correct.
Right, now what about if the States is about to send me back to Central America?
Well, we've made arrangements with the U.S. authorities, and if there's any serious concern that the U.S. would not allow you to remain there for the several days, several weeks, whatever it turns out to be, then we will allow you into Canada.
You'll allow us into Canada. Now, if I'm in the States and I come back for my hearing, say 2 or 3 weeks later, and the States hasn't moved me, what happens to me then?
At that time, you undergo the formal hearing, you make a claim for refugee status, and then you're allowed into Canada.
Now, I'm allowed into Canada even though you haven't yet determined my refugee status.
That's correct. But you're being considered under the Immigration Act, not under any special programs.
So my refugee status is not concerned, but having been to my hearing, at the start of my hearing,
That's correct.
I can then stay in Canada with all the rights of a landed immigrant.
No, not the rights of a landed immigrant. But you're allowed to stay in Canada. The next stage of the process is that you make a formal statement under oath as to why you think you're a refugee. In other words, you're going to prove your case at that point and give us grounds to consider that you are a refugee.
At what do I then get a permit to work?
That's at that stage, yes.
I think, but then, and if I am refused though after that, after my statement is considered by the Refugee Advisory Board.
The Refugee Status Advisory Committee recommends to the minister whether or not you're a refugee. The minister gives you the decision. If the decision is a negative decision, you then have the right to have your case considered by the Immigration Appeal Board. And if you're still unhappy at that stage, you can go to the federal court.
So therefore, what this has done, it's left the same kind of procedures in motion. It merely backs people up at the border until they get to the status where they're in to make the statement as a potential refugee.
That's correct. Mind you, and this is the part of the program that people have focused on. There are other parts of the program. There were other changes that were announced on Friday. And
leave those for the moment.
Okay.
Just for a minute to go to Vera. That seems to be quite clear that what has happened is that all they've done is kind of backed up the flow of refugees into the country. But once you get in for your hearing as a refugee, you have much of the rights of a Canadian landed immigrant, as far as appeals are concerned.
No, you don't. When you come into Canada, and after a certain stage in the process, you then have to, after you come into Canada, you have then to prepare for your presentation under oath, which is all the factors of why you feel you are a legitimate refugee. Until that stage, you are not entitled to work. I'm not sure about if you're entitled to...
When do I get my work permit?
When you do your statement under oath as to why you think you're a refugee.
Once I've done my statement under oath, I then get my work permit.
That's correct.
And I'm then in a position whereby I can take advantage of all the appeals if the Status Advisory Board goes against me.
That's right.
Yeah, I would agree
So
with
you're
that.
not entitled, at this stage, you're not entitled to English classes, you're not entitled to assistance from Canada Employment in finding a job. So really, that stage, when people have come here, is a very in limbo stage.
No, I can understand that. It's in limbo, but as far as the entry of a refugee and its qualification is concerned, the only thing that's changed is the fact that you may have to go back to the States to begin with.
That's correct.
Come back up here, make your statement at your refugee hearing, and then you're entitled to your appeals. Presumably, we put them on some allowance once they're in, do we?
No, not at that stage.
No allowances at that stage, but they can get a permit to work at that stage, but no allowances at that stage. Now, a word on transit visas. That was the other major change.
That's one of the other changes, yeah.
What was that major change?
Okay, that's people that require visas, people from many countries in the world now require visas to visit in Canada. They didn't all require transit visas, and this was found to be a loophole. In other words, they could say, I'm going to South America, I have to come through Vancouver on my way to South America, I'll only be transiting, stopping over a few hours, and they didn't require a visa, so they came and made a refugee claim. Now that loophole has been plugged, and they will be required to get a transit visa before they come to Canada to get a visa. So we'll have an opportunity to look at them.
Is this people from every country?
No, this is not from every country. A number of countries in the world that do require visas. So, and these are generally countries where we've had difficulty
Turkey,
in the past. Yes,
Portugal,
some of the newer countries. Yeah.
Or economic migrants who are not real refugees.
That's correct. Yeah.
But if even when I come into Vancouver on my transit visa, I can still come to you and say I want to be a refugee.
If you get a transit visa.
Well, at the other end.
Yeah.
Complicated, isn't it?
It's very complicated. I don't think a lot of Canadians understand all the complications in the refugee process. For example, I don't think that Canadians understand that what we are talking about here, the refugee determination process, is only one aspect of refugees.
But it's the most important aspect. Do they or do they not get into the country?
It's one aspect. The other aspect is that we have 16,000 refugees that come to Canada every year that are processed by immigration offices abroad and come as either government-sponsored or private-sponsored refugees.
I'll come to that point too after the break. I'm with Jim Pasman, Acting Enforcement Manager for Immigration, and Vera Radio of the agency non-profit that helps immigrants called Mosaic. Now, I don't want to get into the political aspects of it, but obviously something had to be done to control the flow so we know what we're facing. Isn't that right?
Correct.
Correct. Now, surely, what is the best way? What is a refugee? And where can a refugee apply it other than the border?
Well, the Canadian government has 64 offices around the world. We are processing refugees outside of Canada all the time. We're processing in the United States. We have 10 consulates in the United States, and refugees from Central American countries have been processed through those offices in the last few years. They come to Canada then with all the documentation and everything in advance, and they're admitted to the country as permanent residents when they arrive at the port of entry.
What the United States is doing to us, really, and this particular push is what they did, what Cuba did to them. Is that not so? Here's a bunch of people, you take them, we don't want them. Perhaps that's too brutal. But you deal with the actual problem. What's the biggest single problem you have with groups as they come through the border, or do they come here as refugees?
I don't know if there's a biggest single problem, but the basic problem that people have is surviving when they first come, because often they don't know the language, they don't have any money, they don't have a place to stay, they don't have any food, and there are some misconceptions about what's available in Canada. Certainly we had people thinking that when they came up to Canada they'd be given a house and an allowance, and that just isn't so. And people coming to Mosaic have thought we would provide that. Basically, we provide information on what is available in the community.
Are they automatically covered by medical services, can anybody tell me? They are in Ontario and Quebec, they go on medical services and allowances. Take some calls. We may have elicited some problems in the minds of people. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was just listening to the lady about the money situation. You know, it happened when we had all the refugees from Vietnam in. They were sponsored by church groups and so on and so forth for the first year. Then they went automatically on social welfare. This is going to happen again, and Canada, as far as I can see, is becoming a laughing stock in the world for letting all these people in and just doing nothing.
Well, it's certainly been very easy on the subject, and the Turkish one was one of the classic ones. Economic migrants are not a privileged category, are they? They've got to make normal application. Turkey and Portugal were the two ones on that one.
But the thing is, how
Just
much...
a minute.
I'd also like to respond to that question, that after a year of support that they automatically go on social assistance. I think that's a very wrong assumption. Most people who are here want to get on their feet and work as quickly as possible, learn the English language. And I can just give you an example of somebody who was in our office the other day who, from the face of it, looks like a very sort of tough, traditional macho Latino man. And when our worker talked to him, he said, I don't want the social assistance, I want a job. I can't sleep at nights because I'm thinking about all those dead and mutilated bodies that I saw in Guatemala when I was there. And he says, if I can get a job, I can
You will
be
find
okay.
the reaction that many Canadians around here also want jobs, although generally speaking, some of the lower paid jobs are not all that overly sought.
Okay, thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
We do find that refugees do take those lower paid jobs, and they will take any job that they can in order just to basically
To survive. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yep.
I'm on the line, eh?
Yes, you are.
Mr. Pasman,
Yes.
I have a question. I've just heard the program, and you've made a statement that if the American government decide that they're going to send these refugees back to the countries they're from, that you will allow them into Canada immediately. Was that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
So we're playing right into the Americans' hands again.
Well,
all they have to say is all the refugees that apply at the Canadian border, if they're not accepted, we send them back to wherever they're from, and we have them. Is that correct?
I don't think we're basing this on the word of the refugees completely here. This is an agreement with the United States. We're in consultation with our counterparts across the border. We already have some indication of the types of cases that might be in danger if they were sent back to the United States, danger of being returned to their homeland. And this is going to be dealt with on an individual case-by-case
But this
basis.
was the statement you made, Mr. Pasman.
Oh, yeah, but he's saying, too, that they have liaison with their counterparts in the United States with whom you have good relations, I'm sure. And they'll say, well, Joe Blow or whoever is liable to, we've got orders to get him out.
As an example, there were people that came up on the weekend and they were returned to the United States, and they came back today for their inquiries. We were able to do their formal hearings today, and they all returned from the United States for their hearings today.
That's right, and they'll stay in here until they get the Refugee Status Advisory Board okay one way or another.
Correct.
Well, I don't think the regulations are nearly as draconian as when they were first presented, in my interpretation of what I saw and read elsewhere.
Just as a suggestion, why don't we poll the population of Canada to see their reaction? There is an absorption point.
Well, you'd have a problem with that, and I must admit with all sympathy that that's no way to run a country. It's like having a referendum on capital punishment.
I agree 100%.
Okay.
Of the polls that I've seen, generally Canadians are in favor of providing sanctuary to people who are genuine
legitimate refugees.
And I think what nobody wants people who are abusing the system and who are, as you say, economic migrants. And so what we want is a fair and equitable system that determines who is and who is not a refugee, that is quick, efficient, and gets rid of abusers.
Well, that's exactly what you feel the department is trying to aim at now.
This is a step in that direction. There have been announcements by our minister that there will be other proposals put forward in the near future, and that's what the aim of the department is.
Well, I'm grateful for your explanations and for your part in the program too. My thanks to Jim Pasman, acting enforcement officer, acting manager of enforcement for BC and Yukon, and to Vera Radio of the Mosaic Society.
Sorry we didn't have a gift for you. We didn't know that was required.
I'll give you my old shoes after the break. To those who favoured free trade, protectionism is bad. But when the lack of protectionism threatens 400 jobs in BC's only steel mill, where the wages paid are union at $15 an hour, the lack of protectionism can be locally disastrous, especially if these jobs are lost. Recently, we've had 8,000 tons of Mexican steel brought into the Surrey docks in Vancouver. It's 20% cheaper on the very face of it than the local product. And even though Mike Wilson added a 7.5% tariff on third world steel the other day, it may still be sold at prices which make it very difficult for Western Canada Steel, to which I journeyed the other day to meet John Wilson, the President and Chief Executive Officer, to look at the problem. Well, here we go, up the stairs into what turns out to be a little touch of Dante's Inferno, the blast furnace in this plant on Twig Island in Vancouver. Where am I? Where am I?
You're in the melt shop right now.
Of Western Canada Steel?
Western Canada Steel Limited on Twig Island.
Twig Island. And you've been in business here for how long since the company started?
Since about 1924 the company started. It moved here in about 1960.
Just tell me what's happening in this inferno here, will you?
Well, there's 100 tons of steel has just been melted down from scrap in that furnace, and it's being poured out into the ladle to be taken over to the continuous caster, where it's cast into billet.
And then after you cast it into billet, you manufacture it into various products.
That's exactly right. We roll it into reinforcing steel and what is called merchant bar, which is small structurals.
And what you call reinforcing steel, I would know it better as rebar, would I, for concrete?
Exactly right.
Now, silly question, because I'm here for a reason. How's business?
Well, business is slow.
How many employees do you have in this operation of Western Canada Steel?
We have about 400 here.
Now, you got good news the other day, did you not? The fact that the third world countries are going to have lost their preferential treatment and going to have to pay an extra tariff of some 7.2%, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Does that make you happy?
Yes, it does.
How happy? Does that remove the possibility of your markets from being undercut here and now?
No, it doesn't. It's certainly a help, but these people are bringing in steel at prices perhaps 10 to 20% below what we can. And so although it's a help, it isn't the solution.
Now, for instance, I've never heard about a threat from steel from Mexico or Brazil or Korea before. How recent is it?
Oh, well, it's been there for a long time, and it's always come in small quantities. But at the end of last year, it started to come in much larger quantities, principally as a result of the voluntary restraint agreements into the United States.
Oh, it's just like the refugees. They can't get into the States now, so they're coming to Canada.
It's rather like that, yes.
Rather like that. Now, but you haven't lost much. Have you made money in recent years?
No, we haven't, in fact, made money in this operation since 1982.
Let's continue this in another area of your operations. We'll go back out again.
Okay.
That's a good demonstration of local recycling of metal junk at its very best for practical use in industry with BC jobs. And now, let's catch up with John Wilson, the CEO again, and see what else is happening around here. Now, tell me what's happening right now. You dropped in a load of scrap.
We dropped in about 30 tons of scrap, and now the electrodes are going down into the scrap and arcing to the scrap.
Where do you get all the steel?
It's from all over British Columbia.
You mean junk, scrap?
Yes, mostly cars and old refrigerators and such things. But
unlimited supply. But what about all the smoke from that thing?
Well, we take it up and we take it through a bag house and we recover the dust and we sell it mostly to C.A.I.M.A.W and Trail for the zinc content.
You recover zinc?
Yes, we recover zinc.
From the smoke in a bag plant, which is over there?
In a bag house. That's right behind us, yeah.
So, minimum pollution.
Exactly. This is a continuous casting process, and it's not easy to see what's happening here, but essentially it's pouring into the top of a mold, and the steel is coming out of the bottom of the mold, and we'll see it further on down below.
It's gone from scrap to molten to bar.
Yes, and now what we see is this billet coming out, solidifying from the continuous caster and going on to be cut into lengths and then put into inventory before being reheated and rolled in the mill.
How much would this plant cost?
It's $10 million.
10 million? Yes. And we're going from here to the rolling mill?
Right.
How much does it cost?
The rolling mill, we spend between 82 and 84, about $30 million.
$30 million. So while it's not a giant operation, it's an effective heavy industry.
Oh, yes, it is.
How are you?
Not bad. How are you, Mr. Webster?
Where am I now? In the rolling mill?
Yeah, you're in the rolling mill division.
What's your name?
Adolf.
How long you worked here?
39 years.
Good place to work?
Oh, yeah. Pretty good.
How old are you?
I'll be 60 in August.
You're just a boy. Well, John, I learned a lot more about Western Canada steel mills than I expected to this morning, but now I want to talk to some of the guys to see how they feel about things. Do you feel your job's threatened? By the way, your name?
Borys Lessy.
Are you happy, let's put it this way, with the 7% tariff put on Mexican steel?
Well, it's a start.
What should it be?
Well, double.
Double. Because if you lost your job here, is there any comparable place where you can get a job, a union job at good wages?
Not from here.
Not in British Columbia?
No.
That's how long you worked here?
14 years.
14 years. That's a long time. How about you? Your name again?
Ernie Bayer.
Ernie, what's your job in the plant?
I'm a shearman.
A which?
Shearman.
You cut steel?
Right.
You cut steel. Now, I came out here because I felt this place was threatened with this subsidized steel from the third world countries. How do you feel about it?
Well, I certainly feel that that's right.
Mm-hmm. How long have you worked here?
28.
28 years?
Right.
28 years?
Mm-hmm.
And if this place didn't survive, it hasn't made money since '82, I'm told.
That's what we're told, yeah.
Good. By chance, here is Cathy Walker, the staff representative for C.A.I.M.A.W. Now, Cathy, Is this a company now where the union and management really cooperate?
Well, we're certainly, both sides are making every effort to cooperate.
Because you had a nasty kind of dispute a couple of years ago, didn't you?
Well, we did in '83. We were down for 6.5 months.
6.5 months, I remember that. Now, when they say they're losing money, when they tell me they're losing money, do you believe it?
Well, we do. The company's opened their books to the union, and they've shown us in great detail the financial difficulties the company's under.
Tell me about this deal you've made. It's not a cut you've made. What is it?
Well, it's a 10% wage and salary deferral. So if the company gets into a profitable position, we're going to start seeing the money get paid back to the workers and to management as well.
Is this one of the first places where the management and the overall owners of C.A.I.M.A.W have really opened the books to the union?
Certainly the first one we're aware of.
Now, on the tariff itself now, Wilson deserves a little pat on the back, does he not, for putting a tariff on Korean, Mexican, taking away the preferential treatment and putting a 7% tariff on it?
Sure, it's a baby step in the right direction, in our opinion.
But I'm surprised that you, Cathy, is saying that we shouldn't take the third world stuff to help the developing countries.
Well, how are we helping the developing countries? I mean, the stuff that's being imported right now is coming from a steel mill in Mexico that's owned by a U.S. company. Who's getting the profits?
Well, if you make an average of $15 an hour here, what do you think the Mexican steelmakers get paid?
Well, probably not very much, but you got to remember this is a really capital-intensive industry. So, you know, even though there is a substantial difference in labor costs, I think overall we really are quite competitive with even third world steel, but we can't compete with dump steel, and that's what we're facing right now in British Columbia.
You regard it as dumping?
It is. You know, we've had these restrictions in the United States. They've cut back their imports, and as a consequence, we've got 10 times the problem they ever did.
They can't get the stuff into the States, so now they're bringing it into Canada.
That's right.
With the Mexican peso devaluing all the time. There's one point I've got to clear up with John Wilson before I go. John, I had got the impression earlier that you've got how many 100 tons of Mexican steel lying in Vancouver waiting to be sold?
There's about 8,000 tons.
8,000 tons. If they sold all of that, how much to your customers, how much business would you lose?
That's about a quarter of our business.
Conceivably, that could put you under.
Yes, if it continues, which we're told it will for the rest of this year, that certainly will put us under.
Yeah, but how can you avoid that? I mean, it's a competitive market. They have much cheaper labor costs. They can afford to undercut you all through the Canadian market.
I think they probably can, yes. We have to combat that by getting with our customers, getting them to realize that it's in both of our interests to stick together and keep that steel out of here. Also with our government.
So you'd like to see some more pressure on the government to increase the tariffs on the third world countries still?
Certainly would.
That would protect the jobs of the 400-odd people you've got working out on Twig Island.
That and the other things we're trying to do to make ourselves more competitive would do that.
More efficient.
Yes.
And relations are good with the union. You've got your 10% deferment.
Yes, I think they're much better than they have been in many years, but we still have much work to do. I'm sure they'll tell you that too.
My thanks to John Wilson.
Seconds. And 10. 5, 4.
Tomorrow, Speaker John Fraser of the House of Commons and also Jim Nielsen on the WCB at 5 p.m. precisely.